A single dam, a hidden past, a reactor seconds from meltdown. Welcome to HFY Vanguard, the channel of human courage and destiny. Steve Riley had mastered the art of invisibility, not the kind granted by advanced cloaking devices or exotic alien tech, but the social invisibility that came from being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as part of the background. For exactly 547 days, he had walked the pristine corridors of the Zarian Energy Facility without so much as a glance of acknowledgement from those who worked beside him. He had learned that if he kept his eyes lowered, his back bent, and his voice confined to the simplest responses, he would pass through the galaxy unnoticed. And for a man like him, that was both a curse and in some twisted way a form of safety. The job itself was humiliatingly simple. Push a battered cleaning cart down corridors that gleamed with sterile perfection, mop up spills he wasn't allowed to ask questions about, and scrub machinery he wasn't supposed to touch. He wore the standard gray jumpsuit assigned to human staff, a garment deliberately dull in shade and tight at the shoulders, stained permanently with fluids whose origins he never identified. Every night when he stripped it off, his skin carried the faint scent of industrial chemicals, sweat, and something else, something metallic and alien that never quite washed away. His physique remained solid and muscular, not sculpted by gyms or vanity, but forged through the grueling grind of hauling waste containers, kneeling to polish reactor chambers, and lifting equipment that machines could have moved more efficiently. The Zarian overseers often reminded him that humans were cheaper than drones. They didn't mean it cruelly, not exactly. To them it was an obvious truth, like stating that water flowed downhill. Yet every time the words were said in his presence, Steve felt the weight of them pressing into his ribs. They didn't see him as a man. They didn't see him at all. Director Nix, the woman who ruled over the facility like a snow-crowned monarch, was the epitome of this disdain. Tall, elegant, with deep blue skin and hair as white as Arctic frost, she carried herself with the kind of effortless superiority that made others shrink in her presence. Her perfectly tailored suits always gleamed under the facility's lights, and her glasses, an affectation rather than a necessity, emphasized the sharpness of her gaze. When she passed Steve in the hallways, she rarely slowed. If she spoke, it was to give commands clipped shorter than a breath. Human Sector 7, spill, now, faster. She never used his name. To her, he was a function, not a person. He remembered one particular exchange with cutting clarity. Nix had been gliding down the corridor, data pad in hand, accompanied by her assistant. Without even looking up, she had instructed Steve to clean a coolant spill in Sector 7. As she swept past, her voice dropped to a murmur that she hadn't meant him to hear. Honestly, why we still employ these primitives is beyond me. Drones would be far more efficient. Her assistant had answered mildly, budget constraints, Director. Humans are cheaper. Steve had clenched his jaw, forcing his face into practiced neutrality, while inside his chest, his heart pounded with restrained fury. He had heard worse over the months. To the Zarians, humans were barely more than clever primates useful for labor, but nothing more. Steve might have accepted that image of himself if not for the memories he carried. Memories of a different life, one that had ended in tragedy. There had been a time when his name carried weight, when his opinions had shaped policy and design, when he had walked among the brightest minds of Earth's frontier science. He had been an engineer once, a specialist, a leader, a husband. But those days were gone, torn away in fire and accusation. Now to survive, he had learned to wear the cloak of invisibility and accept that his role was to be unseen. There was, however, one person for whom Steve would never be invisible. Every evening when the shuttle ferried him back to the residential district, the mask slipped from his face the instant he opened the door of his modest apartment. Lily would hurtle across the room, her 8-year-old arms wrapping around his waist with unrestrained joy. "Daddy," she would squeal, and in that moment the aches in his muscles, the insults still ringing in his ears, the loneliness he carried like a stone in his gut, everything melted away. Lily was his anchor, his reason. With her wide brown eyes already sparkling with curiosity, and the quick wit that made her teachers comment with equal parts admiration and exasperation. She embodied everything Steve loved about humanity: adaptability, resilience, a stubborn refusal to give in to despair. She had adjusted to life among aliens with the ease only children could manage. Where Steve saw the city of spires as cold and alien, she saw beauty, adventure possibility. She learned the Zarian language faster than he had picked up their songs, and even played with their children, though the cultural gap was vast. Every insult Steve swallowed, every degrading task he accepted was for her. She was the future that made the present bearable. Still, Steve couldn't ignore the tension that curled in his chest like a coiled spring. The facility thrummed with energy, a constant reminder of the dangerous work done within. The plasma reactors were marvels of technology capable of fueling entire districts, but also engines of potential catastrophe. Steve, who had once studied such systems intimately, knew how delicate the balance was. He wasn't supposed to understand the numbers flashing on the screens he glimpsed in passing, but old habits never truly faded. Sometimes he would catch a display reflecting in a corridor window, and though he forced his eyes away, part of his mind would already be running calculations, recalling schematics, noting inefficiencies. There were moments, small, unguarded slivers of time, when his hands itched to intervene to point out a misaligned valve, a coolant pressure reading just a little too high. But he knew better. His role was to clean, not to think, to obey, not to question. Invisibility had kept him alive, had kept Lily safe. It was easier to pretend ignorance than to risk revealing the truth of who he had once been. Yet sometimes late at night, when Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heating unit, Steve would sit at the table with his old data pad. It was one of the few relics he had carried from Earth, battered but still functional. He would open folders he hadn't touched in years: technical schematics, engineering manuals, project reports, and scroll through them with a mixture of longing and grief. He told himself it was just to keep his mind sharp, just in case. But deep down, he knew it was also a way to remind himself that he had once mattered, that he had once been more than a mop in a cart. The irony was not lost on him. A man who had once designed plasma containment systems for humanity's grandest space stations now spent his days scrubbing stains from the floor of a reactor chamber. Appearances could deceive, he mused bitterly. The Zarians thought him a primitive. They had no idea that the man they dismissed could, in certain circumstances, have been the one saving them from disaster. He tried not to think about it. He focused instead on Lily, her laughter, her questions, her boundless energy. She needed him alive and present, not risking everything for pride or principle. The world had already taken too much from her: a mother stolen in an instant, a future uprooted, a home abandoned. Steve would not let it take her father too. And so day after day, he pushed his cart through shining halls, bowed his head to cold commands, and told himself that invisibility was survival. What he didn't realize, what no one realized, was that the same facility that treated him like a ghost was slowly, inevitably marching toward a catastrophe. And when it came, invisibility would no longer be an option. The Zarian Energy Facility was a cathedral of hums and pulses, every corridor alive with the resonance of alien technology. Steve had grown accustomed to the rhythm of it, the low thrum of coolant pumps buried deep within the walls, the faint vibration underfoot from plasma conduits, carrying controlled fire through reinforced veins. To most, the sounds were background noise. To Steve, they were a language he could not help but hear. Every day as he moved with mop and rag, he told himself not to listen. But old habits had sharp claws, and sometimes the whispers of the reactor cut through his invisibility. It happened on a day like any other, while he was neutralizing a coolant spill in Sector 7. The substance shimmered faintly icy blue with a metallic tang, one of those alien fluids he had long stopped trying to categorize. He crouched, gloves on, carefully spreading neutralizing powder when voices drifted closer. Two Zarian engineers passed by, their heads bowed toward each other, unaware or unconcerned that the human janitor could hear them. "The fluctuations in the primary cooling system are getting worse," one muttered, his tone edged with worry. "If those readings are accurate—" "Keep your voice down," the other hissed. "Nix doesn't want to hear it." She's already made it clear we can't shut down with the delegation arriving tomorrow. If we don't address this, we might not have a choice. The backup systems are compensating at maximum already. Another surge in. Their voices faded as they turned a corner, leaving Steve crouched over the shimmering spill, his hands frozen mid-motion. His pulse quickened. He didn't need to hear the rest. Cooling system fluctuations. Backup capacity at the limit. His mind unwillingly supplied the implications. Pressure spikes, heat buildup, cascading failures and containment. The vocabulary of doom. He swallowed hard and forced his hands back into motion, scrubbing, sweeping, rinsing. But inside, alarms blared louder than any siren. He had once lectured junior engineers on precisely this problem, how ignoring small deviations could spiral into catastrophe. And now here it was playing out around him, and he was powerless to intervene. "Not your problem," he whispered to himself, dumping the soiled cloth into the waste unit. He was a janitor. He was invisible. Invisible men did not speak up. Invisible men did not save facilities. They kept their heads down and went home alive. Later that evening, he did exactly that. The shuttle ride home was quiet, the seats mostly empty, the twilight sky outside painted in streaks of purple and gold by the twin suns sinking beyond the horizon. Neon blue spires pierced the sky, their tips gleaming like stars in waiting. To the Zarian eye, it was magnificent. To Steve, it was alien grandeur that left him hollow. He pressed his forehead against the shuttle window, wishing for Earth's simpler skylines, a line of trees, a battered farmhouse, even the blinking lights of highway traffic. Things that were real familiar, human. When the shuttle hissed to a stop at his residential block, Steve trudged up 3 flights of stairs, the elevator perpetually out of service before unlocking the door to his modest apartment. And then in an instant, the weight slid off his shoulders. Daddy Lily's voice rang like a bell, and her small form launched itself at him. He caught her lifting her easily, burying his face in her hair. For that moment, there was no reactor, no nix, no humiliation. There was only the warmth of his daughter's embrace. They ate stew that their neighbor, Mrs. Venn, had left simmering, Lily chatting animatedly about her day. "Miss Tara taught us about Zarian history today," she said proudly. "I showed everyone how to write their names in human letters." Steve smiled, nodding even as unease lingered in the back of his mind, like a shadow that refused to fade. After dinner, he tucked Lily into bed, listening as she whispered their nightly ritual, "Love you to the moons and back." His heart tightened as he kissed her forehead. "Love you more," he answered, the words anchoring him as they always did. Only when she drifted to sleep did he retreat to the quiet of the living room. For a long moment, he sat staring at his old data pad lying on the table. The screen was smudged, its casing worn, but it still functioned. He hadn't touched the engineering files in years. They belonged to a life that was over. Opening them was reopening wounds that had never healed. And yet, tonight his fingers itched. He powered it on. Lines of technical schematics filled the display, cooling systems, containment field, algorithms, safety redundancies. The diagrams were as familiar as an old friend's face. He scrolled slowly, reading with the focus of a man reacquainting himself with a language he had once spoken fluently. His mind, dulled by months of cleaning duty, sharpened again, like a blade pulled from rust. Equations danced in his head. Calculations clicked into place. If the primary cooling system is fluctuating, he thought grimly, and the backups are already maxed, then every minute they stall for politics, they're gambling with a disaster. He closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. He should forget it. He should shove the data pad back into its drawer and never look again. But the whispers of the reactor clung to him. He couldn't silence them any more than he could silence his heartbeat. Sleep came late and fitful. In his dreams, warning lights strobed crimson. He heard Lily's laughter echoing in empty corridors, blending with the rising whine of coolant pumps on the verge of failure. He saw his wife's face so clear, so close, before fire consumed her and left only ash. He woke drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling, unable to banish the images. The next morning, he rose earlier than usual, his body still aching from restless sleep. As he dressed in his jumpsuit and laced his boots, he whispered another promise to himself, one he had made 1,000 times before. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. Do it for Lily. And yet as he walked into the humming heart of the facility, he couldn't help noticing the subtle differences. Zarian's staff moved faster, voices clipped, tension palpable. Even the hum of the reactor seemed sharper, more urgent, as though the machine itself was crying out. Steve pushed his cart forward, eyes down, but his mind was anything but still. He knew now with a certainty that gnawed at him that catastrophe wasn't a distant possibility. It was coming creeping closer with every passing cycle. And though he told himself again and again that it wasn't his problem, he couldn't escape the truth. One day soon the reactor would stop whispering. It would start screaming. The next morning began like any other, at least on the surface. Steve walked into the facility with his cleaning cart rattling slightly against the polished floor. The hum of the plasma conduits threaded through the air, steady, but carrying a dissonance only he seemed to hear. He forced himself into routine mop heads, stacked neutralizers, sealed gloves clipped to his belt. Invisibility demanded consistency. But from the first corridor he entered, he felt it, an edge of tension vibrating through the halls. Zarian's staff moved quickly, their normally smooth, aloof strides sharpened into urgency. Conversations were hushed but clipped, and though their voices lowered when Steve passed, he caught fragments that set his stomach churning. Diagnostics unstable, containment at threshold. Director Nick says stall until delegation. The last phrase repeated like a drumbeat in his mind. Stall, pretend control, risk everything. As he pushed his cart past the main control room, he slowed. The door was ajar, light spilling out in a harsh white rectangle. Inside, Director Nick stood like an icicle, pale hair glinting, her hands slicing the air as she gestured at the holographic display. These readings can't be accurate, she snapped, her voice taut with irritation. Run the diagnostics again. Director, we've run them 3 times, and an engineer protested, his shoulders rigid. The primary cooling system is failing. The backups are already at 87% capacity. Secondary containment protocols are showing strain. Nix's lips pressed into a line. The delegation arrives in 6 hours. Do you have any idea what an evacuation during their inspection would mean for my career? Find a way to stabilize it until tomorrow. That's an order. Steve froze in the hall, gripping the handle of his cart until his knuckles ached. She was gambling with catastrophe to protect her career. A plasma containment breach wasn't a delayed dinner appointment, it was a city killer. He forced himself to move on, head bowed, but inside his thoughts were racing. If backups were already at 87%, they were beyond the safety envelope. Hours at most before chain failure. Maybe less. He nearly collided with Tren, one of the few Zarians who ever spoke to him with civility. The engineer steadied him with a 3-fingered hand. Whoa, careful, Steve. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just thinking, Steve muttered. His eyes flicked down the corridor, then back. Tren glanced around, lowering his voice. You heard about the cooling systems? Steve hesitated, then nodded. Hard not to notice all the worried faces. It's worse than they're letting on, Tren whispered, violet eyes darkening. I've been monitoring readings all night. If the primary system fails completely, the backups won't hold for more than an hour, maybe less. Why isn't Nick shutting it down? Steve asked, though the answer already pulsed in his head. Tren spat the word like it was poison. Politics. The delegation includes representatives from central governance. She's hoping for a promotion. Steve's jaw tightened. At the risk of a containment breach. That's insane. Tren's eyes narrowed. You know about plasma containment? His tone was curious, almost suspicious. Steve realized his mistake instantly. He looked away, voice casual. Just pick things up here and there. Cleaning near enough consoles, you start recognizing terms. Tren studied him a moment longer, then clapped his shoulder gently. Be careful today. I've got a bad feeling. So did Steve. By midday, tension had coiled through the facility like a living thing. He deliberately routed his cleaning rounds past monitoring stations, ears pricked for scraps of information. Each fragment he gathered painted the same picture: imminent disaster. The primary cooling system had dropped to less than 30% efficiency. Backup systems were showing signs of failure. Yet no evacuation order came. No shutdown initiated. Nix's orders remained absolute maintain appearances until the delegation arrived. Steve's lunch sat half-finished in the human staff break room when his comm unit buzzed. He frowned at the display. A message from the office of Director Nix. His stomach dropped. He had never been contacted by her office before. Human maintenance worker Riley, report to Director Nix immediately. For a long moment he sat frozen. Had they caught him eavesdropping? Had someone noticed his lingering glances at readouts? With a resigned sigh, he dumped his meal container and made his way to the executive level, an area rarely polluted by human footsteps. Nix's assistant, a pale-skinned Zarian whose expression radiated disdain, barely glanced up as Steve approached. "She's expecting you," he said curtly, waving him through. The director's office was sleek minimalist, dominated by a panoramic window that looked out across the central plaza. Nix stood with her back to the door, her silhouette cut sharp against the glow of the city. "You wanted to see me?" Director Steve asked, keeping his tone flat. She turned her glasses, flashing under the light. "Riley, yes, I have a special assignment for you." Steve waited, face carefully blank, despite the storm churning inside him. "The delegation will tour the reactor core section in approximately 5 hours," she continued. "I need that area immaculate. Every surface, every corner. Nothing out of place." "The reactor core," Steve echoed, unable to mask his surprise. "That's a restricted area. I don't have clearance." "You do now." She slid a temporary access card across her desk. "This is a priority, Riley. The future of this facility and my career depends on it." Steve picked up the card, feeling its weight as if it were a key to something far greater than polished floors. Access to the core meant seeing the truth firsthand. He forced his voice steady. "I understand, Director. I'll make sure it's perfect." "See that you do." She turned back toward the window. "And Riley, stay out of the way when the delegation arrives. I don't want them distracted by local color." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Of course, Director." The reactor core chamber was a cathedral of power. Steve swiped his temporary card, and the massive doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The space swallowed him whole, vaulted ceilings, a pulsing blue-violet glow at its center, where the plasma roared within a containment field. Shadows danced across polished metal floors, the air charged with the static tang of raw energy. He wheeled his cart inside, a mask of dutiful obedience on his face, but his eyes devoured every detail. Monitoring stations ringed the chamber, their displays alive with cascading error messages. The numbers stabbed him like knives. The primary cooling system was at less than 15% efficiency, worse than even his fears. Backup strained at 94%, climbing steadily toward failure. This wasn't a possibility, it was a countdown. He abandoned his mop and crossed to the nearest console. His hand hovered over the interface. If he accessed the system, there would be a record. His invisibility would shatter. But if he did nothing, the chamber would become his tomb, and Lily's too, in the fallout. The decision was stolen from him when a shrill alarm blared, bathing the chamber in flashing red. Warning lights pulsed across the displays. A backup cooling pump had just failed completely. "Screw it," Steve muttered, slamming his palm on the biometric scanner. The console flared to life. To his astonishment, it accepted his print. Nix had granted him system permissions, likely so he could move equipment for cleaning, but she had unknowingly armed him with a weapon. His fingers flew across the interface, muscle memory awakening after years in dormancy. Diagnostics scrolled past in a blur. Cascade failures lit up across subsystems. Containment field stress at dangerous levels, temperature climbing like a rocket. They had minutes. Behind him, the chamber doors hissed open. "What do you think you're doing?" Nix's voice sliced through the alarms. Steve turned to see her, stride and delegation in tow. Formal robes, elaborate markings, all staring at the human janitor at the controls in shock and outrage. "Director, we have a serious problem," Steve said, abandoning pretense. "The cooling systems are failing faster than predicted. We need to initiate emergency shutdown protocols immediately." Nix's face hardened. "Step away from that terminal, Riley. You are not authorized." "With all due respect, Director, we don't have time," Steve snapped, turning back to the controls. "Primary cooling is below 15%. We just lost a backup pump. If we don't act now, we'll face a full containment breach within minutes." "Preposterous. One of the delegations scoffed. Our engineers would have alerted us to such a crisis. As if on cue, another alarm bellowed deeper, more urgent. A second backup pump had failed. Your engineers did alert her, Steve shot back, nodding toward Nix. She ignored them because of your visit. Gas rippled through the delegation. Nix's blue skin darkened, her lips tightening. That's enough. Security will... Counselor Zex, an elder delegation member, interrupted. His pale blue skin faded with age. His gaze was sharp, his tone decisive. Perhaps we should listen to what this human has to say. These alarms are most concerning. Steve seized the moment. The containment field is already showing microfractures from heat buildup. If plasma escapes, it will chain react through the entire facility. We need a cold shutdown now. A cold shutdown would take hours, Nix argued. The damage, not if we bypass the protocol, Steve cut in, fingers flying. I can reroute emergency coolant reserves directly into the core housing. It'll fry some components, but it will prevent a meltdown. The delegation exchanged looks, murmuring. Zex stepped forward. Do it. Nix stiffened. Counselor, you can't possibly. I said do it. Zex repeated, steel in his voice. I have seen reactor failures before. If this human can prevent catastrophe, let him try. Steve didn't wait. His hands danced across controls, rerouting flows, bypassing safeties. I need someone at level 3 to override the interlocks manually, he said quickly. System won't let me inject coolant without confirmation from a physical station. I'll go, a young delegate offered, but Nix's voice cut him off. No, I'll do it. Her face was tight, her voice sharper. This is my facility. Tell me what to do, Riley. For the first time since he had arrived, Steve saw something in her eyes that wasn't disdain, something closer to respect. He rattled off instructions, surprised at how quickly she grasped them. Then she was gone, sprinting toward level 3, leaving him to finish the bypass. Ready at level 3, her voice crackled through the comm. Steve adjusted the final sequence. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, mark. The facility shuddered. A roar echoed as supercooled liquid surged into the reactor housing. Lights flickered, alarms howled. The entire chamber quaked, as if the building itself might collapse. Steve's breath caught. For one terrifying instant, he thought he had miscalculated. Then slowly the reading shifted. Temperatures dropped. Containment stabilized. Indicators shifted from crimson to amber. It's working, Steve breathed. Delegates crowded the console, watching the numbers retreat from the abyss. Counselor Zex placed a hand on Steve's shoulder. You've just saved countless lives, human including ours. The chamber doors banged open again. Nix stumbled back in breathless, her eyes meeting Steve's across the room. For the first time since he had known her, they held no trace of arrogance. Only shock, relief, and perhaps respect. How did you know how to do that? She asked quietly. Steve opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, another alarm wailed, different, deeper, urgent. He spun back to the console. The coolant injection had worked, but it had created a new problem. Pressure was building in the secondary chambers. Unless released manually, the facility was still a ticking bomb. Victory had lasted mere seconds. Now, once again, all eyes turned to the invisible man who wasn't invisible anymore. The chamber still pulsed red with alarms when the new warning bellowed through the facility. Steve's eyes flicked to the console, scanning the flood of data. His stomach dropped. The coolant injection had stabilized the reactor core, but the rapid influx had created a secondary problem: pressure building in containment chambers B through F. If they weren't vented in sequence, the reactor would still rupture, not with the blinding fire of plasma, but with the concussive force of a steam explosion capable of leveling the entire facility. Pressure buildup, Steve said loud enough to cut through the alarms. If we don't release it manually, we still lose the core. How long do we have? Counselor Zex demanded, his face grave. Steve's fingers flew across the diagnostics. 15 minutes, 20 at most, before it hits critical levels. Nix stepped, closer eyes on the flashing red indicators. Where? Sections B through F, Steve answered. But the automated systems are shot. Someone has to physically override the release valves. I'll do it, Nix said immediately, her chin lifting in defiance. I'll handle sections D through F. Steve shook his head sharply. No, the sequence matters. If the wrong valves are released in the wrong order, the shock wave could destabilize the entire system. We need to coordinate. Two people working in tandem. Zex interjected, his tone calm despite the tension. Then you go together. I'll coordinate from here. You'll need to move fast. Steve nodded once, already moving toward the exit. Nix fell into step beside him, her long strides keeping pace with his. As they pounded down the corridor, the crimson emergency lights cast everything in a pulsing glow. The walls seemed to pulse like veins, the floor reverberating with the angry heartbeat of the reactor. Explain what I need to do, Nix demanded as they ran. You'll shadow me, Steve said, glancing at her briefly. Watch what I do at B, then replicate it exactly at D. No improvising. The sequence has to be precise. And if we fail, he didn't sugarcoat it, then the containment blows and everyone in this facility is vaporized. They reached Section B. The heavy door was rimmed with hazard symbols, its panel flashing warnings in harsh scarlet text. Steve slammed his access card into the reader, the door hissing open to reveal a small chamber thick with steam. The air was hot and damp, carrying the acrid scent of superheated metal. Stay close, Steve warned, moving to the control station. His fingers danced across the console, overriding safeties, rerouting pressure. Metal groaned as valves shifted, releasing superheated steam through exterior vents. The floor trembled beneath their feet as the pressure dropped. That's it, he said, stepping back. Now you, Section D. Same sequence. Nix's face was pale but steady. Understood. They split at the junction, Nix racing towards Section D. While Steve turned towards Section C, he froze halfway down the hall as the radiation reading spiked across his wrist monitor. Section C was bathed in a wash of dangerous energy. The coolant injection had destabilized shielding, making the area lethally hot for Azarian. Nix's voice crackled through the comm. Section D's panel is online, beginning sequence now. Hold, Steve barked, staring at the radiation symbols flashing across the bulkhead before him. What is it? Radiation levels in Section C. Too high for you. A pause, then we'll both... No? Steve cut her off. It's within tolerance for a human, but it would kill you within minutes. I'll handle it. You can withstand that, she demanded, disbelief cutting through her voice. One of humanity's few advantages, Steve said grimly. He pressed his palm to the door scanner. The heavy slab hissed open, a wave of blistering heat and radiation washing over him. His skin prickled instantly, vision sharpening with adrenaline. Steve Nix began. Go to Section D, watch my sequence from there. Do not deviate. We're on the clock. There was a beat of silence, then Nix's voice came steady through the comm. Understood. Good luck. The radiation chamber was hell. Warning lights strobed across metal walls, warped by heat. Alarms screamed constantly, echoing off the steel. Steve's throat burned with every breath. His protective jumpsuit was useless here, designed for spills and mild hazards, not this. He forced himself forward, past flickering hazard beacons, to the control station at the far end. The panel was warped with heat, but still functional. His fingers flew over riding locks, initiating pressure release. Steam vented through exterior channels, shrieking like banshees as it roared out into the atmosphere. He gritted his teeth against the vibration muscles, taut, hard hammering. The pressure gauge dropped, but slowly, too slowly. Nix, he called through the comm. Section D complete, she answered, voice taut but controlled. Proceeding to F on your signal. Wait for my call, Steve said, scanning the readings. His stomach sank. The pressure was redistributing through tertiary coolant lines, building dangerously in an adjacent zone. Zex, he snapped into the comm. We've got a complication, secondary buildup in E7. If we don't vent it, the whole system spikes again. Location, Zex demanded. E7, Steve replied grimly. But it's even hotter than C radiation near lethal levels. No one else can make it through. Steve, you'll... Nix's voice broke off, then returned harder. You'll kill yourself. I don't have a choice. He shut down the Section C panel, forcing his body into motion. Hold at F until I give the all clear. Understood. A beat of silence. Then Nix's voice, low but steady. Understood. Section E7 was worse than C. The radiation was so intense that his skin prickled in waves, his vision blurring at the edges. Safety locks tried to deny him access, automated warnings blaring, evacuate immediately. Lethal hazard. He ignored them, overriding each one until the final barrier slid aside with a reluctant hiss. The emergency release valve loomed ahead, a massive wheel of metal behind a protective shield. No neat console, no digital interface, just a brutal manual crank. Steve's gut twisted. This was the last line of defense, a mechanism so primitive it couldn't fail electronically. And now it was his only hope. He wrapped his hands around the wheel. Metal burned his palms, even through gloves. Muscles screamed as he heaved against the resistance. The valve resisted, grinding with stubborn inertia. His breath came in ragged gasps, the heat baking his skin, sweat stinging his eyes. "Riley, your vitals are spiking!" Zex's voice came urgently through the comm. "Sensors show dangerous exposure. You need to get out now." "Not done yet." Steve grunted, forcing the wheel another half-turn. Steam hissed through the vents, pressure dropping incrementally. His arms trembled with effort. His vision blurred further. Nix's voice cut through tight with urgency. "Section F is ready. Give me the signal." "Wait!" Steve panted, straining. "Not yet. If you vent now, the redistribution triggers a shockwave." "Steve, hold position," he barked, forcing the last rotations. The wheel finally groaned, locking into place. The pressure gauge dropped sharply, alarms fading one by one. The chamber still glowed with red warnings, but the critical threshold slipped back into safe range. "Pressure stabilized," Zex confirmed, relief audible even through static. "All sections returning to green." "You did it." Steve staggered back, lungs burning, his legs buckling beneath him. He stumbled out of the radiation zone, sealing the door behind him before collapsing against the corridor wall. His hands shook violently. His skin itched with the burn of exposure. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, heart hammering, before footsteps echoed down the corridor. Nix appeared breathless, her eyes wide with alarm. She dropped to her knees beside him. "You idiot," she said, but her voice carried no malice, only relief threaded with something that startled him. Concern. "Would you have let me go if I'd told you?" he rasped, forcing a weak smile. Her jaw tightened. "No, but I wouldn't have expected you to sacrifice yourself either." She stopped, her throat working. "You're just a janitor," Steve finished for her, his lips curling faintly. "Yeah, well, appearances can be deceiving." She slipped an arm under his shoulder, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. He leaned heavily on her as they staggered back toward the control room. For the first time since he had stepped foot in this facility, he wasn't invisible. Every eye would be on him now, and the question was, what would they see? The medical bay smelled faintly of antiseptic and humming machinery, a place of cold efficiency rather than warmth. Steve lay on a narrow bed, monitors attached to his chest, his veins carrying the burn of Zarian anti-radiation serums. The treatment had been swift, their technology advanced enough to purge most of the cellular damage, but exhaustion still weighed on him like lead. His eyes stayed closed, the darkness a refuge against the flood of memories that came with stillness. Alarms screaming, metal groaning, Lily's laughter echoing in his mind, and the image of his wife, swallowed by fire all those years ago. He wasn't alone. He could feel the weight of eyes on him. With effort, he opened them, blinking against the sterile glow. Nix stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, her pristine composure cracked just slightly at the edges. There was relief in her gaze and something else he had never seen before, guilt. "The doctors say you'll recover fully," she said, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "No lasting damage." Steve pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing at the ache in his muscles. "Good to know," he muttered. He glanced at her. "How's the facility?" "Stable," she replied. "Your emergency protocols worked. The engineering team is implementing them as we speak." She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Counselor Zex is impressed. The entire delegation is." Steve said nothing. He wasn't interested in their belated admiration. He had heard contempt for too long to care about a sudden shift in tone. Let them think what they wanted. He had done what was necessary for Lily, for everyone trapped in this city of glass and spires. Nix's lips pressed into a thin line. She pulled a chair forward and sat beside him. "I owe you an apology, Riley. I've treated you poorly." "You treated me like you treat all humans," Steve corrected flatly. "Like we're primitive tools, barely worth acknowledging." Her gaze flickered, then dropped for the first time. Yes, she admitted softly. I did. And today you proved how wrong I've been. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of medical monitors. Then she looked up, then her blue eyes sharp with curiosity. How does a man with your expertise end up cleaning floors in an alien facility? That's not something that happens by chance. Who are you really, Riley? Steve leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For a long time, he said nothing. The story had festered inside him for years unspoken because saying it made it real. But something in him shifted as he looked at her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the knowledge that his invisibility had already shattered. Or maybe it was because for the first time she was asking, not commanding. Finally, he spoke. I was the lead containment engineer for Earth's Jupiter Station project, designed the plasma reactor that powered the whole operation. Nix's eyes widened, shock breaking through her mask of control. Jupiter Station. That was a groundbreaking initiative, entire journals devoted to it. But the project, her voice trailed off, uncertain. Steve's jaw tightened. It was supposed to be humanity's next step, a self-sustaining outpost at the edge of our solar system. I poured years of my life into designing its systems. The reactor was my masterpiece, redundant, resilient, a symbol of human ingenuity. His voice cracked, bitterness leaking through. Until the accident. What happened, Nix asked quietly. He closed his eyes. The memory was as sharp as broken glass. We were running the final test before full activation. Everything was stable. Then one of the coolant systems failed. I detected the problem early, recommended an immediate shutdown. But my superior director, Hammond, overruled me, said delays were unacceptable, said we had to prove our worth to the council. Nix flinched at the parallel. Steve continued, his tone low and raw. The system destabilized. I managed to prevent a full meltdown, but not before 3 people died. One of them was my wife, Lily's mother. His hands trembled as he spoke. She was a systems analyst. She was only there that day because I asked her to check some calculations. She trusted me, and she paid the price. The silence that followed was heavy. Nix's expression softened, her usual armor stripped away. I'm sorry, she said simply. Steve laughed bitterly. The investigation cleared me. Officially, I did nothing wrong. But Hammond had political connections. He needed a scapegoat. He buried the override order, erased the evidence, and pinned the blame on me. My reputation was destroyed overnight. No one would hire me. I lost everything, career, credibility, my wife. All I had left was Lily. He turned his head, meeting Nix's gaze directly. So I left Earth, took a transport to the first world that would take us. Here humans weren't engineers or scientists. We were cheap labor. The only work they offered was cleaning up after your superior species. And I took it because I had a daughter to feed. Nix's throat worked as she absorbed his words. For once, there was no arrogance in her face, no dismissal. Only understanding and a flicker of shame. And yet, when our reactor was failing, you didn't walk away. You didn't let us burn. After what happened to your wife, no one would have blamed you. Steve's eyes hardened. That's not who I am. I couldn't let people die if I could stop it. Even people who think I'm barely sentient. She winced. I deserve that. Straightening in her chair, she drew in a slow breath. Counselor Zex has asked me to offer you a position as technical advisor to this facility. A substantial increase in salary benefits and accommodations. Effective immediately. Steve blinked, stunned, despite himself. You're offering me a job, just like that. You saved the facility, quite possibly the entire district. Your expertise is wasted on maintenance duties. Her voice wavered for just a moment, then steadied. And I would value having someone with your knowledge on my team. Steve studied her. He noted the subtle shift in her demeanor, the arrogance gone replaced by respect. Perhaps something more. And the fact that I'm human, clearly irrelevant to your abilities, she said firmly. Then softer, I was wrong about that. Wrong about many things. The admission seemed to cost her, and Steve found himself appreciating the honesty. Still, his expression stayed guarded. I'll need to think about it. This isn't just about me. I have Lily to consider. Of course, Nix said, nodding. The position would include family housing in the executive quarter. better schools, safer environment for your child. Steve raised an eyebrow. You've thought this through? A faint purple blush tinged her cheeks. The delegation was insistent that we secure your services. I've spent the last hour arranging the details. Steve chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Must have been fun, creating a position for a primitive human. To his surprise, Nick smiled a genuine smile, not the icy mask she usually wore. Actually, it was educational. Counselor Zex gave me a lecture on interspecies prejudice. I would have paid to see that, Steve said dryly. Her smile widened, and for the first time he realized how striking she was when not hiding behind severity. It caught him off guard, leaving him unsettled. He looked away, focusing instead on the monitor at his bedside. Nix rose from her chair, smoothing her tunic. Think about the offer. In the meantime, you're on paid leave for a week to recover. And Riley, she hesitated at the door, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. Thank you. Not just for saving the facility, but for doing it despite how we treated you. As the door slid shut behind her, Steve sank back into his pillow, his mind racing. A technical advisor position, better housing, a safer life for Lily, everything he had dreamed of since arriving in this alien world. Yet the ghosts of Jupiter Station whispered in his ears, and the memory of Hammond's betrayal weighed heavy. Opportunity had finally found him again, but so at risk. And deep down, Steve knew this wasn't just about a new job. It was about trust prejudice and the shadows of sabotage still lurking in the heart of the facility. For the first time in years, Steve was visible again. The question was, what would they do now that they could see him? The first week of Steve's medical leave should have been restful, but instead it gnawed at him with unease. He spent his days in the new apartment provided by the facility, spacious, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Lily loved it. She darted from room to room, marveling at the embedded starlights in the ceiling, the pool on the ground floor, the play area designed for executive families. To her, it was magic. To Steve, it was gilded glass. Comfortable, yes, but fragile. He felt the cracks beneath the surface. And then Nix returned, her expression more serious than ever. She stood in his living room while Lily happily played in the corner and delivered the words that turned unease into certainty. The investigation into the cooling failure has begun, she said. Preliminary findings suggest it wasn't an accident. Steve's gut clenched. You're saying it was sabotage? Possibly, Nix admitted. The primary coolant line showed evidence of deliberate tampering. Subtle enough that it looked like wear at first glance, but once our engineers probed deeper, the pattern was clear. Someone wanted the system to fail. Steve exhaled slowly. He had suspected as much. His instincts had screamed that the breakdown had been too convenient, too perfectly timed to coincide with the delegation's visit. But hearing it confirmed sent a chill through him. Who? Nix's mouth tightened. We don't know, not yet. But there are rumors of an organization. Extremists. They call themselves the Purity Front. They believe Zarian society is being diluted, contaminated by outside influences. They resent humans most of all. Steve's mind flashed to the sneers, the whispers, the way Zarian engineers had looked through him as if he were dirt beneath their boots. Prejudice wasn't rare, but organized sabotage, that was something new. You think they were behind them? It fits their profile, Nix said grimly. Similar incidents have been reported on other colonies. Subtle system failures, accidents that almost weren't accidents. Always in facilities where humans or other species worked alongside us. Steve's fists clenched. So this wasn't just politics, it was hate. Nix nodded. That's why we need you. You understand the systems better than anyone. You can see tampering where others see noise. We can't afford another incident. Not here. Not when you and your daughter are now targets. The mention of Lily made his blood run cold. Instantly, the invisible cloak he had worn for so long seemed laughable. He had been anonymous, safe in his obscurity. Now with the delegation praising his name and the facility offering him a high-ranking position, his invisibility was gone. And in its place, a target painted squarely on his back. The weeks that followed were a blur of transition. Steve was officially sworn in as technical advisor. His quarters upgraded, his uniform replaced by tailored suits. But with the recognition came scrutiny. Some of the Zarian engineers resented him openly. Chief Engineer Krell, in particular, radiated hostility every time their paths crossed. His deep blue skin seemed to darken further whenever Steve entered a room. Yet Steve pressed forward. He threw himself into work, poring over schematics, reviewing logs, and reconstructing the hours leading up to the near disaster. And the deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. The sabotage had been deliberate, executed with surgical precision. Whoever was responsible knew the systems intimately. This wasn't the work of a clumsy agitator. It was an insider. He wasn't content to just defend. He wanted to strike back. And so late one night, he spread schematics across a conference table, surrounded by the few Zarians he trusted: Tren, the earnest engineer who had warned him early on, Vela, sharp-eyed and meticulous, and Corin, younger, eager, but loyal. Nyx stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, her gaze locked on Steve. "This is the trap," Steve said, tapping the glowing diagrams projected above the table. "A hybrid system. It combines your quantum monitoring protocols with human redundancy principles. On the surface, it looks like routine upgrades, nothing unusual. But embedded inside is a false vulnerability, a honeypot." Vela's violet eyes widened. "A what?" "A trap," Tren translated, leaning forward. "Exactly," Steve said. "Anyone who tries to exploit the vulnerability will trigger a silent alarm. And while they think they're bypassing safety, the system will record everything. Biometric traces, neural signature, the exact identity of the saboteur." Korn frowned. "But won't they be suspicious of a new system installed so soon after the incident?" Steve shook his head. "That's the beauty. Krell already authorized routine maintenance upgrades last week. We folded in quietly. To the outside world, it looks like we're patching weak spots, nothing more." Nyx studied the diagrams with visible admiration. "This is brilliant. You're giving them bait and they'll never know they're swallowing the hook." Steve shrugged, though pride glimmered in his eyes. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to give them something to chase. Tren tapped the edge of the projection. "How soon can we implement this?" "Tonight," Steve said firmly. "I've already prepared the components. We just need authorization." "You'll have it," Nyx said without hesitation. Lily was restless in the secure facility where she had been moved under guard. Steve hated it, hated that his daughter's freedom had been reduced to monitored rooms and escorts. She was only 8. She should have been exploring parks, playing with friends, living a childhood unburdened by politics and sabotage. But now her laughter echoed in sterile halls under the watchful eyes of security. Nyx visited often. To Steve's surprise, she brought gifts, children's books, and Zarian script games designed to teach strategy, even a small crystalline toy that pulsed with gentle light. Lily adored her. She clung to Nyx's arm during visits, peppering her with questions, unfazed by the difference in skin color or species. Nyx, for her part, seemed softened by the child's affection, her icy demeanor melting into something almost maternal. Watching them together stirred something unexpected in Steve. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, something he didn't dare name. He forced himself to focus on the mission. Protect Lily, stop the saboteur, nothing else mattered. That night, the facility was quieter than usual. The hum of the reactor steady but subdued. Steve, Tren, and Vela moved quickly through maintenance corridors, installing the new system. Corin monitored from the control room while Nyx oversaw the operation, her eyes flicking constantly to security feeds. Every connection, every reroute, every embedded trap slid into place seamlessly. By dawn, the system was live and visible to all but them. Integration complete. Vela confirmed, double-checking the diagnostics. The honeypot is active. Steve leaned back, exhaling slowly. His trap was set. Now all they could do was wait. They didn't wait long. 2 nights later, during the facility's night cycle, Steve's comm buzzed. He was at home poring over old Jupiter station schematics when the signal flashed across his screen. Silent alarm triggered. His pulse spiked. He messaged Nyx immediately. "We've got a bite. Checking feed now." The security feed flickered to life, showing a figure in engineering coveralls moving through the reactor control room. The intruder's face was hidden beneath a maintenance cap, but their movements were purposeful, confident. They bypassed locks with ease, heading straight for the vulnerability Steve had built. "They're in," he whispered. Nyx's reply was immediate. "I'm on my way. Security has been alerted. Don't engage alone." Steve was already on his feet, pulling on his jacket. No promises, he muttered, slipping out into the night. Steve's boots pounded the pavement as he raced through the deserted streets toward the facility. The city's twin moons hung overhead, their pale glow reflecting off the gleaming spires. His comm buzzed again, Nix's voice sharp with urgency. I've mobilized security. They'll intercept at the main entrance. Steve, don't go in alone. He didn't slow. His executive clearance card got him through checkpoints faster than any squad could follow. By the time the security detail reached the gates, Steve was already inside, his breath harsh in his throat, adrenaline making his vision sharpen like a blade. The reactor complex was eerily quiet during night cycle. Dim emergency lights washed the corridors in shades of red shadows stretching long across the metallic floors. He moved silently, years of maintenance work making every turn, every shortcut familiar. As he neared the core chamber, the faint echo of footsteps reached him. He slowed, pressing against the wall, peering through a viewing panel. The intruder was there, still in coveralls, face shadowed by a cap hunched over the console where the honeypot lived. The silent alarm had done its job. The saboteur thought they were invisible. Steve's hand hovered over his comm to signal Nix, but then the intruder shifted, pulling something from their pocket. A device, sleek, ominous, humming faintly with suppressed energy. Steve didn't recognize it, but his gut told him it wasn't a diagnostic tool. It was a weapon. He couldn't wait. Stop right there, Steve barked, stepping from the shadows, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. The intruder spun. The cap slipped back, revealing a face Steve knew too well. Chief Engineer Krell. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Krell's mouth twisted into a snarl. You, he spat, his three-fingered hand tightening on the device. Of course it would be you. Steve took a step forward, jaw tight. Step away from the core, Krell. Whatever you're planning, it ends here. Krell laughed bitterly, the sound scraping like broken glass. Ends no, Riley. This is just beginning. Do you have any idea what your kind has done? Spreading across the galaxy like weeds, contaminating pure societies. With your primitive ideas, your reckless ambition. The Purity Front, Steve said flatly. Krell's eyes flashed. You don't coexist. You infiltrate. You appropriate. You take what is not yours. And now here in my facility, a human stands above Zarian engineers, giving orders like he belongs. That is the true catastrophe. I'm giving orders because I know what I'm doing, Steve shot back. Because I saved this facility when you were too blind to act, not because I'm human. And that's even worse, Krell roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. You proved yourself by our standards, made others question our superiority. You've poisoned their minds with the idea that humans can stand as equals. That cannot be allowed. He lunged toward the core housing, raising the device. Instinct screamed in Steve's veins. He launched himself forward, tackling Krell before he could reach the console. They crashed hard against the floor, the device skittering away with a metallic clang. Krell was stronger than he looked. His three-fingered hands closed around Steve's throat, squeezing with terrifying force. You should have stayed invisible. Human, he hissed, his face twisted with rage. You and your kind were meant to serve, not lead. Stars danced at the edge of Steve's vision as air fled his lungs. With a desperate surge, he wrenched free, slamming his forearm against Krell's elbow, breaking the hold. He rolled, grappling for control muscles, straining as they wrestled across the floor. Adrenaline carried him. Years of manual labor had kept his body strong, every tendon wired for survival. He locked Krell's arm, twisted, and forced him down. We're done being invisible, Steve growled, pinning him. Get used to it. The chamber doors burst open. Nix stormed in, security guards flanking her, weapons drawn. Stand down, she commanded, her voice echoing like thunder. The guards swarmed, pulling Krell away, slapping restraints on his wrists. The device was secured, revealed in scans to be a disruptor designed to destabilize the reactor's containment field with surgical precision. Far more dangerous than the previous sabotage. Krell struggled, spitting venom with every word. You think this ends with me? The Purity Front has roots deeper than you can imagine. We will not let humans defile what is ours. You can kill me, but you cannot stop the tide. Take him, Nix ordered coldly. The guards hauled Krell away, his curses echoing until the doors slammed shut. Silence settled, broken only by Steve's ragged breathing. He rubbed his throat where Krell's grip had left dark bruises. Nyx approached, her face unreadable, though her eyes betrayed concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Steve rasped, though his voice cracked. "Didn't see that coming." Krell always seemed like a bigot, but not a fanatic. "Sometimes the line between the two is thinner than we want to believe," Nyx said quietly. Steve leaned against the console, his body trembling as the adrenaline ebbed. "What happens now?" "The security team found evidence in his quarters," Nyx said grimly. "Communications plans, direct links to the Purity Front leadership." This wasn't a lone fanatic. Krell was part of something larger, something that may stretch far beyond our world. Steve's stomach sank. So this was more than sabotage. It was the opening move. "Yes," Nyx agreed. "But thanks to you, they've lost their leverage here. The facility is safe for now." Later that night, Steve returned to his apartment, his daughter once again safe at home after weeks of confinement. Lily darted through the rooms with giddy delight, her laughter filling the space. Steve watched her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nyx stood beside him, arms folded loosely. Her gaze softened as she watched Lily leap onto her bed, showing off the glowing star ceiling she adored. "The Harmony crystal is brighter," she remarked, nodding to the glowing sphere on the shelf. "It responds to joy. She's happy to be home." "So am I," Steve said, his voice low. "We both are." Nyx hesitated, then asked almost cautiously, "And you'll be staying? Even after all this?" Steve turned, meeting her eyes. "Why wouldn't we? I wouldn't blame you for thinking I'd run, but not everyone here is Krell, Tren, Vela, Corin, even you. You've changed." A faint purple hue rose in Nyx's cheeks, Zarian blush. "I had the most to learn," she admitted, "and the most to gain by learning it." Their eyes held the air charged with unspoken possibility. For a moment, the world fell away, the alarms, the sabotage, the fear. It was just them two, people who had seen each other clearly for the first time. Then Lily's voice rang from her room, shattering the moment. "Daddy, can Miss Nyx stay for dinner again? I want to show her my star ceiling." Nyx smiled, the tension dissolving into warmth. "I'd be honored," she called back. Steve chuckled softly, shaking his head. Maybe the world wasn't fixed. Maybe danger still lurked in shadows. But for tonight, in the glow of the Harmony crystal, with Lily's laughter filling their home, he allowed himself something he hadn't felt in years: hope. 6 months later, the Zarian Energy Facility stood as a symbol of resilience rather than ruin. Its sleek towers gleamed brighter than before, humming with renewed life, its systems running smoother than any could remember. And at its heart, guarding it against both error and sabotage, was a new system, one born not from alien genius alone, but from collaboration: the Riley Protocol. It combined the most advanced elements of Zarian quantum monitoring with the redundancy principles of human engineering. Elegant in its simplicity, unbreakable in its resilience, it turned vulnerability into strength. It was a hybrid design, like Steve himself, straddling two worlds, embodying the possibility of what could be achieved when prejudice gave way to partnership. The dedication ceremony drew dignitaries from across the sector. Representatives from central governance filled the grand atrium, their robes shimmering in shades of blue and silver. Engineers, technicians, administrators all gathered, buzzing with anticipation. At the center stood a podium flanked by the glowing crest of the facility. Steve adjusted the collar of his tailored suit, a garment that still felt strange after years in grease-stained jumpsuits. Beside him, Lily fidgeted with nervous excitement, her small hand gripping his. On his other side stood Nyx, no longer the icy figure he had once known. Her hair was still white as snow, her posture still proud, but the sharp arrogance had softened into something steadier. Respect, partnership. Something more personal flickered in her eyes whenever they lingered on him too long. Counselor Zex gave the opening remarks, his aged voice carrying weight across the chamber. He spoke of the near catastrophe, of the bravery that had prevented it, of the importance of vigilance. Then he gestured toward Steve. "And now we honor the man whose vision has secured not only this facility, but the future of collaboration between our peoples. Technical Director, Steve Riley." Applause thundered through the hall. Steve stepped forward, Lily's hand slipping reluctantly from his as he approached the podium. For a moment, he stood in silence, gazing out at a sea of alien faces, all watching him. Not with contempt, not with dismissal, but with expectation, respect. A year ago, he would have thought this impossible. He cleared his throat, his deep voice steady. A year ago, I was invisible in this facility, just another human doing work considered beneath notice. I pushed carts, I scrubbed floors, I was never addressed by name, and for a long time I thought that was all I would ever be. He let the silence hang for a beat, then continued. But appearances can deceive. A janitor may be an engineer. A primitive may carry knowledge worth saving. And sometimes the person overlooked is the one who saves you. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but no one looked away. Steve pressed on, his voice growing stronger. The Riley Protocol isn't just a piece of technology. It's proof of what happens when we look beyond preconceptions. When we stop asking, what species are you? And start asking, what can we build together? He glanced sideways. Nix's eyes shone the faintest smile curving her lips. Lily sat at the front, her small hands clapping eagerly, her grin lighting the room. Humans have a saying, Steve said, letting his words slow. Never judge a book by its cover. It means appearances can be deceiving and true value lies beneath the surface. I am grateful to those who chose to look deeper, to see beyond the uniform, beyond the prejudice, to the engineer within. Applause erupted again, louder this time, echoing through the chamber like thunder. Steve stepped back from the podium, his chest tight with a mix of pride and relief. Lily ran to him, slipping her hand into his once more. Nix approached on his other side, her presence steady, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betraying something warm, almost tender. As the crowd dispersed, the Harmony crystal Nix had given them months ago sat glowing on Steve's desk in the control center. Whenever Lily was near, its light pulsed brighter, filling the room with a warmth that was more than ceremonial. It was alive, reflecting the emotional atmosphere of their home. And lately it glowed brightest when Nix visited. For Steve, invisibility was gone. He had been seen, and what they saw had changed everything, not just for him, not just for Lily, but for the fragile hope of coexistence between species. He knew the purity front still lurked in shadows, that bigotry did not vanish overnight. But he also knew that the tide could turn. That change was possible. One act of courage, one moment of recognition at a time. They had underestimated a single human janitor. And in doing so, they had nearly missed the truth that humanity, in all its flawed resilience, carried the power to reshape the galaxy. As Steve stood with Lily on one side and Nix on the other, the applause still ringing in his ears, he allowed himself a rare and guarded smile. The future would not be easy, but for the first time in years, he believed it was worth fighting for. And this time he would not fight it invisible.